I'm Donna Davia. I'm so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Davion. We were all friends and Dom was my soulmate. I wish I could take all your pain away. And I'm so sorry. And to my family, thank you for the support and all the love you guys give. Thank you for fighting with me. I love you all so much.
Mackenzie Shirilla just lost again. This time it came from the highest court in Ohio. The Ohio Supreme Court looked at her case and made a choice. The justices said no. They will not hear her appeal. For Shirilla, this is not the first no. It is not even the second. But this one lands different. This one comes from the top. There is no higher court in the state left to ask. So here is the question everyone wants answered. Is this the end of her fight? Or is there still one more door she can knock on? Most people hear Supreme Court and think big. They think this must be about the crash itself. They think the justices sat down and studied the murder evidence all over again. Maybe they think the court looked at whether Mackenzie Shirilla really meant to kill anyone that night in Strongsville. None of that happened. The court did not touch the murder evidence. The court did not revisit the bench trial. The court did not even discuss whether Shirilla intended to hurt Dominic Russo or Davion Flanagan. Speed was not the issue here. Murder was not the issue here. Intent was not the issue here. Something much smaller decided this outcome. Something most people would never think twice about. A date. That's right. A single date on a calendar is the reason Mackenzie Shirilla's latest appeal is dead. Not science. Not new witnesses. Not a stunning piece of evidence nobody saw coming. A date. To understand how a date can carry this much weight, you have to understand how the justice system works after a conviction. Court cases do not end the moment a judge reads a sentence out loud. There is a whole second stage that most people never hear about, because it rarely makes headlines. This second stage involves strict deadlines. Lawyers must file paperwork within a certain number of days. Miss the deadline, even by a single day, and the court can refuse to even look at your argument. It does not matter how strong that argument might be. It does not matter how unfair the result feels. The clock outranks the content. That is exactly what just happened to Shirilla. Her new legal team built an argument around a medical condition. They claimed she may have lost consciousness behind the wheel. They claimed her first lawyers failed her by not investigating this condition properly. On paper, this sounds like the kind of argument that could shake up a case. But none of it mattered in the end. Because before any judge could weigh the medical claims, before anyone could debate blackouts or steering, or who said what on the witness stand, the court had to answer a much smaller question first. Was the paperwork filed on time? The state said no. Shirilla's team said yes. And depending on which transcript you used to start the countdown, both sides had a case. One transcript pointed to a certain day. Another transcript, filed later, pointed to a different starting point. The gap between those two readings came down to exactly one day. One day decided whether Shirilla's petition was alive or dead the moment her lawyers turned it in. Stop and think about that for a second. One day. Not 1 year. Not 1 month. One single day stood between a hearing on the medical evidence and a courtroom door slamming shut before any of that evidence could even be discussed. This is the part of the legal system most people never see. Movies and TV shows skip straight to dramatic trials with surprise witnesses and big speeches. Real courtrooms run on something far less exciting. They run on procedure. They run on rules about timing, filing, and jurisdiction. These rules decide outcomes just as often as evidence does, sometimes more. In Shirilla's case, procedure won. Substance never got a turn. So picture how this past year unfolded for her legal team. A trial court already dismissed the petition once, ruling it landed one day past the deadline. The 8th District Court of Appeals reviewed that decision and agreed with the trial court. Then her lawyers took their last shot, asking the Ohio Supreme Court to step in and fix what they believed was a miscalculated deadline. The Supreme Court said no. It did not write a long opinion explaining every detail. It did not walk through each argument point by point. The justices simply declined to take the case, which under Ohio law means the lower court's ruling stays exactly as it is. One justice disagreed. Justice Patrick DeWine dissented from the decision, signaling he believed the case deserved a closer look. But one dissent does not change a final outcome. The majority ruled against Shirilla, and that ruling stands. For Shirilla, this means her conviction remains untouched. Her sentence remains untouched. The medical arguments her new attorneys built their case around never even reached a courtroom for real debate. All of that effort, all of that legal strategy, stopped cold by a dispute over which transcript started the clock. Now here is where this story gets even more interesting. To understand why this date became such a massive fight, you need to step back and understand what actually happened on the night that started all of this. You need to remember the crash that took 2 young lives. You need to remember the trial that followed and the sentence that came after it. Because without that foundation, the deadline dispute means nothing. With it, you start to see exactly how high the stakes really were, and why one single day became the difference between a fresh hearing and total silence. That story begins back in July of 2022, on a quiet street in Strongsville, Ohio. July 2022. Strongsville, Ohio. A quiet suburb near Cleveland. The kind of place where nothing big usually happens. That changed in a single moment, late at night, when a car slammed into a building at nearly 100 miles an hour. Inside that car sat 3 people. Mackenzie Shirilla was behind the wheel. She was 17 years old at the time. Beside her was her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, age 20. In the back sat their friend, Davion Flanagan, age 19. Russo and Flanagan died almost instantly. Shirilla survived. She walked away with serious injuries, but she walked away. That detail alone made the case feel different from the start. 2 young men dead, the driver alive, and almost immediately, people wanted to know one thing: what actually happened in those final seconds? Investigators pulled data from the car. This is sometimes called a black box, the same kind of recorder found in airplanes. It tracks speed, braking, and acceleration in the moments before a crash. What it showed became the center of the entire case. The data revealed the accelerator was pressed all the way down, fully floored, and in the 5 seconds before impact, the brakes were never touched. Not once. No swerving, no braking, no slowing down. Just speed, climbing higher and higher, right up until the moment of the crash. Prosecutors looked at that data and reached a disturbing conclusion. They believed this was not an accident. They believed Shirilla intentionally drove the car into the building. To support that theory, prosecutors pointed to more than just the black box data. They brought up the relationship between Shirilla and Russo. They described it as troubled, even toxic, in the weeks leading up to the crash. They presented texts and videos that, in their view, painted a picture of growing conflict. Then came something even more alarming. Prosecutors said that weeks before the crash, Shirilla had made a threat. They claimed she said something about wanting to crash her car with Russo inside it. If true, that statement transformed the case. It moved the story away from a tragic accident and towards something far darker, a pattern. a plan. Words spoken before the crash that seemed to predict it. Shirilla's side told a very different story. She has said she does not remember the crash at all. No memory of the final moments. No memory of pressing the gas. She has maintained that whatever happened, she never meant to hurt anyone. That gap between memory and evidence became one of the most debated parts of this entire case. How do you explain black box data showing a floored accelerator and no braking if the driver says she remembers nothing? The case moved toward trial, and here is where another unusual detail enters the story. Most serious criminal cases get decided by a jury. 12 people from the community, listening to evidence, debating, and reaching a verdict together. That is the system most people picture when they think about a courtroom. Shirilla's case did not work that way. Instead, she had what is called a bench trial. This means there was no jury at all. A single judge listened to every piece of evidence and made the decision alone. A bench trial is far less common in big, high-attention cases. Choosing this option shapes a case in major ways. There is no group of strangers weighing different opinions against each other. There is just one judge, one decision. Why a defendant chooses a bench trial can depend on many things. Some believe a judge will be more focused on legal technicalities than on emotion. Others believe a judge is less likely to be swayed by public attention surrounding a case. Whatever the specific reasoning here, the choice meant Shirilla's fate rested entirely on one person's judgment. That judge reached a verdict. Shirilla was convicted of murder. She was also convicted of aggravated vehicular homicide and other related charges connected to the deaths of Russo and Flanagan. The sentence that followed was severe. She received 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life in prison. Concurrent means the sentences run together rather than one after another, but the bottom line remained the same. Shirilla would not be eligible for parole until many years had passed. Her first chance at parole is not scheduled until 2037. Think about that number for a moment. A young woman, convicted as a teenager, facing over a decade before she can even ask to be released. The case did not end with sentencing, though. If anything, that is where a new chapter of public attention began. Why did this story spread so far beyond Strongsville, Ohio? Part of the answer lies in the ages involved. A teenage driver, a boyfriend killed, a friend killed. These are not abstract legal terms. These are young lives, frozen at the exact moment everything changed. Chatter. Part of the answer lies in the data itself. A black box recording, capturing the final 5 seconds before 2 people died, removes any softness from the story. Numbers do not lie or exaggerate. They simply report what the car was doing, second by second, as it sped toward a wall. And part of the answer lies in what came next. Netflix produced a documentary about the case. It is called The Crash. Running 90 minutes, it walks viewers through the collision and the bench trial that followed. Once a major streaming platform tells your story, the audience expands far beyond local newsreaders in Ohio. Millions of people who never heard of Strongsville suddenly knew Mackenzie Shirilla's name. The documentary brought new attention to old wounds. It introduced new viewers to old questions. Was this an accident or something far more deliberate? Did the relationship between Shirilla and Russo really turn dangerous? What really happened in the gap between Shirilla's claimed memory loss and the data showing a fully pressed accelerator? None of those questions disappeared after sentencing. If anything, public curiosity grew stronger once a streaming audience joined the conversation. Meanwhile, Shirilla's legal team did not stop working. Even after the original conviction, even after sentencing, even after a documentary turned this into a household case for true crime audiences, Her lawyers kept searching for any opening that might reopen the conviction. That search led them somewhere unexpected. Here is something most people
Not
get
back
wrong
to the crash
about this
itself.
case. Not
They
back to
assume
the black
Shirilla
box
appealed
data
because
or
she
the
wanted a
alleged
brand
threat
new trial
or the bench trial
They picture her
verdict.
lawyers walking
It led
back
them
into
to
a
a
courtroom,
completely different
asking
kind
a
of
judge
legal
to
argument.
throw out the crash
One
data,
that had almost
the
nothing
texts,
to do with
the
what
bench
happened
trial
on the
verdict,
road that night.
everything,
And everything
and
to
start
do with what
completely
happened
over.
or didn't happen
That is not what
inside
happened.
the courtroom
Shirilla
afterward.
was not asking
That
anyone to
argument is
retry
where the real
facts of the
fight over
crash.
Shirilla's future
She was not asking
would
a court
eventually take
to look
shape.
at the black box
data again, or rehear the claims about a troubled relationship, or reconsider whether the alleged threat ever happened. Instead, her new legal team built their entire fight around something called post-conviction relief. This phrase sounds complicated, but the idea behind it is fairly simple once you break it down. A regular appeal usually argues that something went wrong during the trial itself. Maybe a judge let in evidence that should not have been allowed. Maybe a verdict did not match the evidence presented. These arguments stay focused on the trial as it actually happened. Post-conviction relief works differently. It does not ask whether the trial outcome matched the evidence. It asks something deeper. It asks whether the entire trial process was fair to begin with. Picture it this way. Imagine a tennis match where one player's racket secretly had a crack in it the entire time. The final score might look completely normal. But if that crack affected how the match played out, you might argue the result cannot be trusted, even if nobody changed the score on the board. Post-conviction relief looks for cracks like that. Not in the final score, but in the structure underneath it. This is exactly the path Shirilla's new attorneys chose. They were not arguing that the judge misread the evidence. They were not arguing that the black box data was fake or manipulated. Instead, they argued that serious legal errors happened before and during the trial. Errors serious enough that they denied Shirilla a fair shot at defending herself in the first place. What kind of errors are we talking about? Shirilla's legal team pointed to what is known as ineffective assistance of counsel. This means they believed Shirilla's original trial lawyers failed to do their job properly. Not that they were unethical or corrupt. The claim was narrower than that. The claim was that they made mistakes serious enough to damage Shirilla's defense. Specifically, her new attorneys argued that the original defense team failed to properly investigate her medical history. They claimed the original lawyers never brought in the right experts to examine a particular health condition Shirilla has. And they argued that, because of this, the jury never got the full picture during trial. Wait, there was no jury. Remember, this was a bench trial. So really, the argument became that the judge never got the full picture, because the right evidence and the right experts were never presented in the first place. At the center of all of this sat one specific medical condition. Her new legal team did not just mention it briefly, they built their entire post-conviction argument around it. According to them, this condition could explain something that has confused observers since the very beginning of this case. How does a driver press the accelerator all the way down, never touch the brakes, and somehow have no memory of any of it? If a medical condition could cause sudden dizziness, fainting, or even a complete blackout, that question suddenly has a very different kind of answer. Instead of intentional, deliberate violence, the explanation becomes physical, biological, something happening inside Shirilla's body that nobody outside the car could have seen in the moment. This is the foundation her new lawyers chose to build everything around. But here is something important to understand about how this argument actually works inside the post-conviction process. It is not enough to simply say, she might have blacked out. Courts do not accept theories just because they sound plausible. The argument has to connect back to that earlier idea of fairness in the trial process itself. Shirilla's team had to argue that this medical information existed, that it was relevant, and that her original lawyers failed her by not investigating it and presenting it properly during the bench trial. In other words, the medical condition itself was only half of the argument. The other half was about blame. Blame aimed not at Shirilla, and not exactly at the judge either, but at the legal team that represented her the first time around. This created a strange kind of two-part argument. One part focused on biology, the human body, and what might have physically happened inside that car. The other part focused entirely on legal performance, on what her original lawyers did or did not do before and during trial. Both parts needed to work together for this post-conviction petition to succeed. If the medical condition turned out to be irrelevant, the ineffective counsel claim would lose its foundation. And if the original lawyers turned out to have handled things reasonably, even without bringing in extra medical experts, the entire argument would collapse from the other direction. So which condition are we actually talking about? What does it do to the human body? And how strong is the connection between this condition and a 5-second window where the gas was floored and the brakes never moved? These questions sit at the heart of everything that came next in Shirilla's legal fight. They forced both sides, the defense and the prosecution, into a debate that stretched far beyond typical courtroom arguments about guilt or innocence. Because before anyone could decide whether this medical theory held up, they first had to understand exactly what this condition involves and why some experts believe it could realistically explain a sudden, unexplained loss of control behind the wheel. That explanation is where the next part of this story begins.